So, on this episode of Totally Classic, we are going to bring the plane in for a landing. What plane is that? The plane is AI bias and existential crisis, part three. At the end of the last episode, we were sort of almost like zooming in the last 5 minutes towards a landing. And it felt more like the landing gear didn't entirely engage, and I feel like we ended up doing a stumbly buzz by, maybe even a light crash. No lives lost, but maybe again, maybe some landing gear got kind of like bent and crispy. So we're coming in for the last one to basic. My hope is like a 40 less than 45 minute bringer in for a landing proper here. Um, my name is Brendan McNamara.
And my name is Andy Swindler.
And Totally Classic is a show where two very good friends get together and try to figure out how to compassionately, empathically, rationally, exhaustively, extensively, experientially, curiously explore what is and what is going on in as everyone likes to fearmonger on a daily basis, an increasingly polarized society. But we need not be so polarized. It seems like the polarization is getting worse, which in some ways is driving those who disfavor polarization to the middle. I'm hopeful. And we've been doing this for about 3 years through multiple phases of intense polarization. I feel like it almost reached a new zenith of like, huh, in the past week. Um, but again, that could be my algorithm, folks. Who knows? So we are trying to break out of the algorithm of siloed thought and speak to someone we love and trust who has a different point of view on the world, different, maybe even different worldview in some ways, to see what's what and what's going on. Now, hilariously, this subject we started 2 episodes ago with our first guest, Jake Ward, and we all voted yes, it is an existential crisis. So you would think this would go much faster, as we basically just talked about how bad it was.
I thought we were done.
I know exactly. It should have been a 4 minute show. Instead, here we are on episode three, as we drill down more and more as to like what bias does AI have, and what type of existential crisis does it represent?
And thank you for your rigor. I think part of the one piece of landing gear was that I had missed some communications. I do my damnedest to keep up, and I learn a lot from you, and I appreciate that. Um, but before we get to that,
Yeah.
speaking of polarization, I guess I went to my local No Kings rally
Oh
here
yeah.
just outside of Chicago. I didn't go to the big one, which was pretty cool. They had made this, I don't know, like 80-foot long constitution just at a purely like theatrical level was like, whoa, that's pretty awesome.
That's a pretty
Um,
sweet float.
but the vibe here was I would say like a party vibe. I don't know. It felt,
Yeah.
and it's worth pointing out because I've been to a lot of protests, and the ones like the post George Floyd like pandemic protests, mostly sort of Black Lives Matter vibe was felt way more serious and intense.
Yeah.
And this just felt like a party, like, hey, yeah, great, let's all come together. And
That's the vibe I got as well.
yeah,
Just from the outside, I wasn't there, but just
yeah,
from like kind of witnessing it, it was seemed more silly, which is fun, but it seemed more like an excuse to hang. I think this is also because it was sort of Occupy Wall Streety, where it was
mm,
like, what are the goals of this exactly? Like, what are your list of demands, right? Like BLM had a thing of like, well, some people were just trying to abolish the police altogether. Some were pushing for police reform. To me, still the most potent demand of the time, which I still am absolutely in favor of, is ending qualified immunity for police, meaning essentially they would be able to be prosecuted for far more of the malfeasance they occasionally get up to than previous. And I was like, heck yeah. Like I'm
yeah,
down. I'm down for vaccine companies not to have immunity. I'm down for police not to have immunity. And I understand they need some degree, some small degree of protection, or else there is, in a phenomenally litigious society, we have the problem of getting bogged down in litigation such
yeah,
that there is no more law and order. I understand that, always have. However, there are too many cases over too many years where abuse is kind of just allowed or shuffled along, or the, there's an overabundance of internal protection. But yeah, for this no kings thing, I was baffled, and to me, this is why I was like, this feels like another fork in the road, where millions of people were out. I, but I don't know. And I talked to some people about it and asked a lot of questions online. People didn't answer. Um, and I was somewhat disturbed because I was asking these questions and going, here's what it looks like to me. Can anyone really explain this? One or two people kind of had some explanations. So we talked, we dialogued. That was good.
Like why are we even here? What?
Oh yeah, I was like, what is no, I don't understand
Yeah.
what people are protesting. Like, I don't understand what, to me, it seemed, my best guess, it basically was a big, like, it was like a Democrat rally. It was just a rally for Democrats to get together and be like, we want a Democrat president, is really all I could sort of nail down. Um, but it was one of those things where people who were posting about it were just like, finally, we're all standing up, and like they were very unified, and it was very important. And then my stories or whatever on Instagram got more likes than any stories have for like months. And I was like, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know what I mean? Like when I'm saying something I'm trying not to preach to the choir. I'm trying to like, what I'm trying to do here is actually investigate the content. That is mostly what I try to do online. And so when people are like, yeah, right. In some ways that's great because people feel crazy and don't want to feel crazy anymore. And they want to know somebody else thinks the same way as them. But I was also like, this is a bad sign. And it happened the same week as that AOC clip I sent you, where she had said that why the Republicans won young men away from the Democratic Party essentially was because they had pursued a clear messaging that women are inferior and LGBTQ people are subhuman. Which again, I know I was telling you, I've talked to people from Westboro Baptist. They would go and protest out at like Super Bowl and stuff like that. I've spoken to those people and heard what they've said. Those are amongst the most like anti-queer people I've ever met in my life. And even they didn't say that queer people were subhuman. So I was like, I don't know who is doing this clear messaging to win young men over. I don't even know why that would win young men over. I don't know what young men look at queer people as subhuman. And then I know people who are in like the branch of church that like Doug Wilson is in. That hopefully everyone knows who Doug Wilson is, or if not, look him up. He's been on 60 Minutes recently, and he just did a long interview with Ross Duhat on New York Times YouTube page. He is like a full-on patriarch, believes that every family should have a single vote, that ultimately the father goes and delivers, the wife's, whatever opinions and conclusions and beliefs are factored in, but ultimately the man goes and votes for the household, which a lot of people would consider misogynistic. A lot of people consider him broadly misogynistic. And he and the people I know who go to his church do not think women are inferior. So I was just like, I don't know. The most extreme examples I can think of, I don't even know anybody who says those things, but it was relayed as though it was just like, this is what is. And so
Well, I
across
think that
across those, I started being like, this whole we're living in two realities thing continues to grow. And I think very specifically in this stuff we talked about last episode, that AI is explicitly fostering that. And in some ways, co-creating it on a scale of propaganda never before achievable, actually, in human history.
well, let's go there because let's
Yeah,
let's tie it back to AI, but let's weave this in. Like I think
yeah,
the
yeah.
argument there isn't basically isn't trusting them to declare what they whether they view somebody as human or not. Because if they're denying part of their humanity, it would be the argument of being queer, then they are viewing them as I don't know, I wouldn't say subhuman, but I think that's her connection point is well if you're gonna denounce somebody's way of being or dare I say identity, uh, then you are denying part of their humanity and ergo declaring in your own way that they are subhuman.
But isn't that fascinating? You grew up like I did, generally, I feel like. I grew up probably, well, in many ways. I think both of us grew up in a liberal culture. Would you agree with that? Like liberalism is definitely like sort of the foundational center point wherein all peoples meet.
Can you define that for everybody? and including myself, because I feel like because these terms have gotten slippery, like what is
Yeah.
liberalism to you?
Well, I would view it as being open to the opinions and perspectives of others as very central. Like a liberal democracy means we'd bring in all different people who think all different things, and that is how we create society. American Heritage Dictionary says favoring reform, open to new ideas, tolerant of the ideas and behaviors of others, not bound by traditional thinking, broad-minded. It also
Yeah.
tends to politically, with the way we grew up, has to do with individual freedom, has to do with small government.
Yep.
That's what we grew up as liberal, and that still exists. We did an episode whatever years ago, like are Republicans the new liberals? Because you've noticed living in the sort of progressive bubble, they are not open to new ideas. They have their ideas, which they say are new, right? But then they're not open to, they're actually pretty aggressively against anyone being against any of their ideas. So in many ways, progressives are extremely conservative, where they're like, this is that ultimately, basically, if you don't agree with somebody else, that means you don't think they're human. Which again is, but again, progressivism is anti-liberal, just the same way as faith and flag, or like Christian nationalism is anti-liberal, meaning they really favor like, no, there is a specific way to go, and everything outside that specific way is sin. Now, they seek to impose that by legislation of morality, just like thou shalt not murder is based on a narrow, and the way that we have murder laws are based on a narrow interpretation of what you're supposed to do with human beings. But what I found fascinating about what she was talking about, because again, people call progressive liberals, but it's the critical theory has made it very clear that it is antagonistic to the principles of enlightenment, rationality, and the liberal order. So it's openly, plainly. Hassan Piker, who's a big progressive streamer, has calls it post-liberalism. Some people call it neoliberalism, but it essentially is doing away with liberalism to install a different conservatism. And it's easy for me to recognize that just because I've sort of been quote unquote victimized or oppressed, really, factually, by many of the new tenets of conservatism that progressivism has put forth. But what she's saying is so contrary to how you and I grew up, which was there's nothing you can disagree with another person such that you don't recognize them as human anymore, generally speaking. It would have to get to pretty extreme of literally saying it out loud, right? Like we
Mm.
could see it in Nazi examples or the three-fifths compromise, which isn't quite talking about the person over person, but essentially it was close enough, right? So when people say things out loud, then we know they think we're, they're less of a person. In progressivism, for example, people generally view those in the womb as subhuman. Like I could say that, and I don't think that's controversial, like what AOC said.
That, and that's the correlation I went to.
Yeah, that's because that means literally you can kill them, and people
But
literally say out loud, "Yeah, but they're not human. They're not really a person yet." So if you said that about a
right,
gay
we
person,
have to.
yeah,
That has to be true in order to validate that.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
right. Whereas what you're saying is like, no, I don't think it's right to do what you're doing, or I don't think it's right to think what you're thinking. That is how humans have talked and regarded other humans, as far as I know, always. And it's not dehumanizing until you start saying, well, because of what your views are, you can't be here, or you must, like, you can't be in society anymore, right? You can't come into this restaurant. You have to be put in a camp. You put, like, that's how, like, essentially, we have to ask the question, and she could have, had she said this would have made more sense. The GOP has been, aggressively seeking to dehumanize, and I think it should be wrong, but it's way more tenable to dehumanize illegal immigrants, saying that like they don't belong here in some sort of, and then maybe even suggesting that gets to some sort of fundamental sense. No, I think it's really just about like, well, wait, we have immigration laws, so you do have to come in a certain way, and if you don't, then you literally aren't supposed to be here. Which again, that was like Clinton and Obama Democratic boilerplate. Actually, even Bernie Sanders in like 2015. So it's a new thing that like the left is kind of adamantly sort of different about that. So that's discombobulating for any of us who grew up. But I think that's what I've noticed is like AI also is tends towards anti-liberalism, because it does have this progressive bias programmed across all of them. And so I was like, I feel like hers was a good example of, I thought, being like so siloed as to like have lost her essential grasp on reality, which is the danger of the of consuming bias from an entity that purports to be sort of like the most learned machine in the history of learned machines, and kind of a neutral, it's a living Encyclopedia Britannica, you know.
Right. Well, let's go into that and let's come in for a landing.
Yeah,
Um, and this weaves in, I think, with the prior episode,
yeah.
right? And your thesis. So could you distill the thesis for anybody who happened to be landing on this episode for the first time?
Yes. Let me do I think I have a sixth grade version, and I'll do that one for simplicity rather than the collegiate version, because I feel like the collegiate version has been kind of, um, I don't know, maybe slightly alienating for people. Okay, here's the sixth grade version. Okay, thesis statement, go. Almost everyone in America, from somewhere between 97 to 100 out of 100 people, uses the word gender to mean a person's biological sex, which is set from the start of life, from conception, and can be identified with over 99% accuracy. So this is close to scientific certainty. While only about 3 out of 100, mostly in certain academic, policy, and activist circles, use gender to mean social roles or internal sense of identity only. And history shows that when academics or any small group of influential people forces this type of change in meaning, it has always, ubiquitously, universally, never not been part of the chain of events in the deadliest collapses of democracy ever, killing from tens of thousands to tens of millions of people. So every time this has ever appeared, it has always led to mass harms, especially these are coercive methodologies of enforcing new definitions, new subjective definitions of formerly boundaried terms. Or if you like, from a progressive point of view, this is a language colonization where you come into indigenous territory. And especially in our circumstance, this is coming into gender, right? Which has an indigenous land claim already because it's been in existence for 500 years. So it has a meaning. So the attempted colonization comes in and says, no, now it means this. But it uses the same word, essentially using the same indigenous land, and not only says, okay, we're going to benefit from your 500 years of cultivating this word, and basically use that to empower our new endeavor because it's using this word that's already been used and people have this word in their lexicon and they know it, and so it drafts all of that strength of indigenous cultivation and it seizes control and then says which has already occurred. Hey, you indigenous vernacular users, you're wrong. Not only are you wrong, you're harmful, you're dangerous to other people. You can't do that. We're going to fire you if you do it. We're going to fine you if you do it. Vigilante people have murdered people multiple times now because they won't do it. So we're seeing we're already in this same pattern that's played out throughout history in places like Khmer Rouge, the French Revolution, Mao's China, Stalin's Russia. We saw this in the United States with both the depersonalization of Black people, Native Americans, and the unborn. We also saw this in Hitler's Germany. I just wanted to bring him up last so as to break Godwin's law later than normal. But I can't think of anything. I'm okay versed in history. I'm not a master historian, but whatever. I'm a relatively educated individual. I have not been able to discover, nor have any of the progressive biased AIs been able to discover with me or for me, any examples where this has not led to harm. So that to me is almost like the distinct turning point of like not only the type of thing we're talking about, but the level of existential harm that the propagandizing and language coercion, the scale of it is existential. It's worldwide.
Well, and I'm having a moment here, and maybe this was part of what was happening at the end of the last episode, which got funky part of it was just this like compression of time and other external factors, and then part
Sure,
of it
sure.
was, I was tracking most of this, but then it had this energy of like an ambush where I was kind of like the spotlight, was being shined, and I was just like, oh, I'm not ready, or I'm weirdly, it felt like almost like what you're describing, where I'm being coerced into sort of agreeing with a certain thing, and yet you do your homework and you present it as a logical case.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't actually gone back to listen to it, so it'd be really fascinating,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
just to kind of like go through that again and be in the emotions of it. I mean, it was an emotional experience because I was just like, I was a bit defensive. I was a little pissed off, actually. It's just like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's something there. But what you just said is really meaningful because existential, in this moment, I'm realizing has become like a philosophical buzzword. Um,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
maybe especially for folks who, traditionally haven't had to worry about much, materially. Although, to be vulnerable, you and I literally had a deep, vulnerable discussion right before this show about, some challenges we're both
Yeah,
having in
yeah,
in
yeah.
that category. Um, and so I'm just feeling into the weight of that word, truly.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I
Yeah,
think
I do mean
certainly in the
end
first episode, I'm
existence. Yeah.
just like, it's an existential crisis. Yeah, I don't know. Let's go to another rally. It's got that like
Sure.
almost weird party energy to it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, it
And
has been colloquialized, I think, especially in academic sort of circles, as like, oh my gosh, I'm just not feeling it. I think I'm having an existential crisis, like on a
it's the
on a weekend, like a hard weekend, you know?
it's the ennui of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, totally.
But no,
It's
yeah, but I mean this note that people will cease to exist because
right.
of this. Like people will die at a massive scale. This is worst case scenarioing. But as far as I can tell, precedent wise, this has never not turned out that way. And again, I raised in a Christian home, largely. So then for me to identify Christian, like intense orthodoxy is simple for me. I learned about the Inquisition as like one of the grand failings of Christendom all time. And especially this reminded me, I brought this up to you before, but like this is a good comparison for people who have like a negative view of Christianity. Prior to the Protestant Reformation, one of the major moments of the Reformation and one of the turn points in human history, the invention of the Gutenberg printing press, upon which the Gutenberg Bible was the launch effort. The reason that was cataclysmically enormous was that was seizing back the power of analysis from a single cohort who essentially had been doing masses in Latin for generations to a population of whom nobody spoke Latin. So they would
Mm,
go and they're like, I'm into this church, but they did not know the language that was being spoken. So it was a radical departure to go, no, 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 no. Like everyone needs to know what we're talking about here. So what
mm,
I'm seeing in the progressives is almost like a heading towards Latinate masses, where it's just like, we're going to change all these words. You're going to be shamed, ostracized, fined, and some cases now murdered. And that is also, by the way, that's an intentional progress thing. That's not simply like haphazard. You can track literally you can track it across Etsy right now if you wanted to. The it's openly this it's open season in some ways on this particular cohort of especially quote unquote anti-trans people or whatever. But you're coercing people more and more into be like, no, these things mean what we say they mean. And from internally, they shift so fast that it basically places you in the position of like, dang, you better stick around because we won't even know like what words are. We've talked about the woke naughty list, right? That like if you don't stick around, you don't know by next year these words could be super bad. You can get in super trouble. You could be, and we've already seen what happens. You could be a racist. You could be a fascist. You could be a Nazi. You could be exorcised from these groups. Like you could be excommunicated from the unit very easily. So it creates this whole fervor of like, oh, I better learn. I better learn this language. Meanwhile, most people are still just like we're just living as we lived before, and we're using the like we're doing the things we thought everyone wanted to do, which is like look to institutional consensus as to what these words mean. And gender still means sex according to every dictionary on the planet, more so than it means even social expectations for sex. And certainly even more above it, way above that, it means more than sense of self or internal sense of identity different from assigned sex. So that's why I
Well,
said
not
bi.
according to my fifth grade daughter's sex ed class.
Yes, yes, but exactly, but that's what I mean. But that's like so they're making a religious claim that you can literally just pull out your OED and prove, or you can pull out your Merriam-Webster even and prove, or pull out, you're like, this is not the primary definition. And really what you're offering is not, it's literally on what they said, they are within the 3 out of 10%. And the way I got to that percentage, by the way, folks, was literally, I just literally tabulated the maximum of the social sciences, psychology, critical theory in law schools, etc. I literally just compiled, and I was like, what percentage of the country is that? And now, of course, maybe slightly larger, but the thing is all three definitions rely on biological sex, meaning the primary definition of gender, in order to make sense. They all need it. And the most recent one, the sense of self opposite from that which was assigned at birth, is a logical fallacy known as equivocation, where you change the definition of a word midstream or mid argument, or in this case, mid definition. So you're basically saying your gender is not what your gender is, because gender still does mean, to the most people speaking English, it means biological sex. So it means it's saying it's not the biological category, it's this. So gender isn't gender, it's gender. And then they're using coercive methods, which places it in this precedent extreme. And they're using AI, again, to the degree of intentionality, we don't know, but AI is fostering. This word is just like a preeminent example that you can very easily prove is not majority usage or primary definition. They're doing it with over 100 words. And my thesis beyond the thesis is if you can change language, you can change the world. You can lead the population, you can destroy it. We've looked at this. The Irish have faced this, where their language was dwindling to being dead. And many people, whatever, I heard a Navajo person say this once that was like, the Navajo will truly die the day the last person speaks Navajo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Like,
that's a
so
common refrain. Yeah.
yeah, so essentially that's what seems to be occurring, such that you can say things like dehumanizing, and it doesn't mean dehumanizing anymore. It actually just means, as near as I can tell, like disagreement. And because you're in progressivism, the reason this particular bias is so dangerous, in progressivism, I've heard the phrase, words are violence. That's a novel concept that has never been put forth in the world. So that means responding to words with violence is self defense. That's very dangerous. I've also heard the phrase, silence is violence. Never heard that before either. So that means not speaking is equivalent to violence, which means you can respond to silence with violence in self defense. So speaking words,
But not like a fart, right?
I hope not. It's deadly. Silent but deadly is also violence.
See, I never understood why it wasn't silent but violent. We always
I
that's
know.
what we say because
Yes,
it rhymes. I'm like, why
it
is it silent
rhymes.
but deadly? You
I
know?
don't know. I don't know. As soon as I heard silent but violent, I probably when I was like 11 or 12, I was like, wait, yeah, why haven't we been saying that the whole time? It rhymes. Rhyming is better. Again, my thesis doesn't rhyme, but history rhymes, and history is rhyming right now with this exact same parallel, which we've seen time and time again. We saw it with black folks, where they basically rejiggered what it meant to be a person in order to disqualify them from personhood. We saw it with the unborn. We saw it with Hitler, where he changed what a citizen meant, where it had a strict like guidelines. You were born here, you lived here, you worked here, you bought, the system. And then they were like, well, no, 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 no. Now we only apply it to these people. And let me just holler out, every single one of these examples was promoted explicitly as to the benefit of the marginalized in all circumstances. Hitler wanted to make Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and the malformed non-citizens essentially in order to benefit the Volk, the common people, like the true Germanic people who truly were oppressed and downtrodden, largely because their government got the world involved in World War I. So it's a consequential issue, but nonetheless, same thing in the French Revolution, sort of uplifting the peasants, over the bourgeoisie, et cetera, et cetera. And same thing in Mao's China, where it was like the true people or the new people. And then Cambodia too had the same thing. I mean, literally, it's over and over again. We're championing the underdog. So you must do that. Same thing with the church. We're here to help the lost souls. And so you must listen to us, and we decide what these words mean now, and you must go. And same thing with colonists. Well, we're here to help the savages. We're here to help these savages organize. And they're just, you wouldn't believe what the practices they're getting up to. It's always been benefit promoted as benefit. So I'm trying to look at these universals. And again, anyone listening here who's a history professor who has an example of a coercive language imposition from objective to subjective that turned out well, please let me know because I would like to live in less existential dread.
Yeah, come on the show.
Come on. But how does that unpack for you? And specifically, how does that unpack for you looking at like, I don't know what year it would be for you, but let's say 2018 to 2022, pre 2018 to 2022, Andy, like what, like the pressure you felt in the last episode. At some point, you must have felt in some version in order to sort of adopt kind of like anti-liberal or contrary to liberal positions, which were contrary to the ones you grew up with. Because I've met your parents and they struck me as almost like classic leftist liberals,
Hmm.
certainly open to all perspectives. And like if you disagreed with them, they wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, that person's such a monster or whatever, you know? Um, and so at some point, this, what we've both qualified as a form of new religion became convincing to you. And yet, here's at least something that looks in precedent, at least bears all the hallmarks of precedent harm movements and the most massive harms in human history, um, with enormous power, especially through AI specifically, to distribute that point of view as a good faith interpretation, or that propaganda, like dangerous propaganda, as a bad faith interpretation. Like how did that move happen, and then how does that sit with you now to look and go, oh well, is it that or is it not that?
That's funny. I had to pause to look up the name of this group. I don't know if I'm just tired or that's how far I've drifted in another direction, but it was 11 years ago, 2014. I I don't exactly know what motivated it,
Mm,
but I really started becoming more and more concerned about racial justice in America, which
yeah.
I think we could disagree on a lot of the finer points, but we could agree certainly that there's challenges there, have been historically, and some
Oh
continue.
my, absolutely.
Um, and there's a group called Surge, show up showing up for racial justice, and they had a workshop, and it was called "Ally is a Verb,"
Mm,
and it was, and I didn't really get it. It wasn't until I went to that workshop, it was halfway through that I'm like, oh, I get what they're saying. Like
I see.
it's about being an active participant in this
Sure.
and
Yeah, yeah,
knowing people and stuff. Which generally, hey, that's a cool idea.
yeah,
Um, and it's funny to think, and that wasn't like my first knowledge of this. As you meant, you mentioned my parents. My dad was a philosophy professor.
yeah.
Well, you were there. I didn't always pay attention to my schoolwork, so I wasn't doing particularly well early on. And my dad actually gave me homework over, I think, Christmas break. He was like, "Okay, I want you to read Letter from a Birmingham Jail and write an essay about it,
Yeah,
so I can make sure that you're actually where you need to be." Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so in a weird way, I really appreciate that because that's a fabulous essay. And uh, it's one of the funny things about that journey point in this discussion is that
mm,
by and large, the racial justice black-led spaces I've been in
mm,
haven't been that hot on let's just pull out pronoun usage.
yeah,
And so I don't exactly remember where, just because that's so central to your thesis is the point of language shift.
yeah.
Um, I can't pinpoint where I first encountered pronouns, but I
Oh,
think
interesting. Yeah,
generally was like, oh, I want to get involved in justice movements. It led me to some pretty radical, branches of those movements.
sure.
Um, and then along the way, I had actually way back in 2004, I kind of got political and went to like something called Camp Wellstone, which was named after the Senator Paul Wellstone who died, and
Mm,
um, volunteered a bit, you know, at first for Kerry's campaign, which everybody thought was kind of pathetic, and then
mm.
Obama's. And so I think early on, I really conflated progressivism with Democrats,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent that's true objectively, or I mean,
Yes.
and obviously you've got like the Bernies of the world who are, kind of
Yeah.
in that the
Yeah. Although
poster
he's like
children for the
he's like an old school progressive though. You know what I mean? Like he didn't know last 2 years ago or whatever, he didn't know that the meaning of equity had changed. Like he was still, you know what I
right,
mean?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an
So
important distinction. So
yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
so something shifted there. So that's like,
Dramatically.
wait a
Yeah.
minute. Okay, progressive is like the cool Democrats, maybe.
Yeah. Right. They're literally the most extreme. It's like the farthest left you can go without, I guess, falling into some other category. It's on the
Without
other side, it's the
without
Christian
going
nationalists.
meeting the other side of the circle
Yeah.
and just
Well, it is.
being,
I think it is the
yeah,
other side of the circle.
it is.
It's like white nationalist,
The
Christian
extremes touch
nationalists.
each other.
Yeah, they totally do.
And so, part of it's for whatever reason being attracted to that. I mean, we've talked
Yeah.
about this where it was like,
Oh, for
oh, I want
sure.
to place a bet on like the minority viewpoint because when that turns out to be right, that's really fun. And you're
Oh,
like, oh,
heck yeah. Yeah, yeah,
totally
yeah.
stuff.
Who doesn't love an underdog?
Um, so yeah, so my journey is like getting pretty deeply involved, and then somewhere along the way, actually, there's this group, I think it still exists, is focused on white men,
Yeah.
organizing white men for collective liberation. And I think one of the more beautiful branches of that was really around healing and
Mm,
just this beautiful space of exploration. And that's a lot of what I was up to, especially at the time, was facilitating deep dialogues and just being together and
yeah.
being vulnerable and healing and all that groovy stuff. uh, and in other ways, that group turned out to be the most extreme version of
Mm,
what you're describing,
yeah.
in the context of, I think the one time I tried to say something that wasn't in the consensus, it was just the conversation started to be set up like, oh, we need to call in our brother and set him straight. That was
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
basically the energy of it. And it was like, I'm like, yeah, I don't actually trust this group.
For that particular private process. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
You can still be,
so,
I think you can still be vulnerable with people you wouldn't necessarily like have be your judge, jury, and exexecutioner.
well,
Um,
that's true.
so
And
those
I
things
don't,
can both exist.
yeah, not, well, it wasn't exactly, it was very, I mean, it's like an anarchist group, right? So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
by definition, not like terribly well organized,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, which is challenging, right? Because I believe in like distributed leadership, but at the same time, it's like, well, we're not ants. Like, we don't do well with that historically.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
we need
Yes.
structure,
Yeah.
communication, and I think the point you're largely always getting at is shared language, right? That's one of the ways we
Yeah.
can build cohesion and actually understand what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, in order to that ladders up, hopefully, to like serving
Yeah.
noble
To actually
noble
serving
goals.
everybody. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I don't know. It's there's a little trip down memory lane. So I will say one other anecdote. This is really funny. I was actually speaking at an event. It was probably 2019. I think it was right before the um, pandemic, and it was a women's group,
Mm.
professional women's group. I don't actually exactly remember the topic, but and there was a panel. And I think it was maybe half men, half women. And I get there, and they had name tags. You just write your own name,
Yeah.
and I wrote my pronouns because I was very much I was like a quiet champion of that. I mean, I was putting it
Hmm.
on all my platforms and
Yeah.
whatnot. I wasn't. I know two guys, two other white men, that were really loud about it. That who both like put on LinkedIn like why I use pronouns and why it's an act of
Yeah.
solidarity, with
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly with trans folks, etc. And it was fine. I remember at the time feeling like I resisted that, and I never ended up doing that big public
Yeah.
announcement.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at the time, sort of thought maybe, oh, I'm like not courageous enough to do that. And
Oh,
now looking
interesting.
back, I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I didn't do that. Because I sensed that there was just something not quite right about at least being like that sort of broadcasty about it, like, oh, like look at me, it feels like virtue signaling, at the highest
Yeah.
degree. But anyway, back to this event with the women. I'm filling out my name tag. I write Andy Swindler, and I put my pronouns. And I see a woman there, one of the organizers, and she laughs. She thought it was a joke.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I mean, she had no, she didn't know the lingo, right? The
Sure. Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
the nomenclature. And there was no expectation of this group that anybody would do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's a women's group, so clearly they're honoring that
Mostly
binary.
one. Yeah.
But it was a funny moment for me. I think that
Mm.
moment in a way was a bit of like, is this is this the way?
Is this, yeah, yeah. Is this funny?
In a Mandalorian kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is not the way. This is the way. Well, pronouns are fascinating because it has a 5,000-year history of pronouns being associated with biological reality. But that was my, wait, maybe it's even a turnkey. Like, was there, and then we could land this for real, um, especially that, even more so than gender, because gender is only 500 years old, meaning biological sex, but 5,000 years across all, like Proto-Mesopotamian to now, pronouns, again, for the majority of English speakers and for our entire lives prior to the past 10 years, pronouns always refer to biological gender, meaning like gender itself, like it's a gender term. So to me, I'm almost interested in like the solidarity, like how was it justified as in solidarity to essentially depart the 5,000-year tradition of your ancestors and declare affiliation with this, I'm going to phrase it as, especially in your spaces, dealing with colonization and anti-colonialism, like a colonial imposition, like literally the 1% saying, we want pronouns to be subjective now. We want them to be based on whatever people says they are. So we're leaving 5,000 years of tradition, and we're leaving the safety of our collective, really, of our 5,000-year tradition collective, in order to like jump on this new path, which is progressive in its own sense, right? Open to new ideas, that sort of thing, not bound by tradition, no matter how old it is, which is good. It produces innovation.
Progress. Progress.
Right, it's progress, right? But that has a recency bias where not we already know not everything new is progress because black people didn't used to be black people and then they became black people. Was that progress?
Right.
No. When natives began to be overthrown, slaughtered, killed by disease, treaties broken, well, that came later. So is that progress? So then we all know already that recency doesn't equal progress. Things don't all naturally continually evolve positively. So it was like I think that one's probably even more interesting of an alteration where again for 5,000 years and still the majority of people use it. I mean, what percentage of the time do you use pronouns as a human English speaker, even in that world, to mean someone's biological gender? Like 95% of the time that you just use it in common speech. You know what I mean? When you're in Georgia, she came
Right.
home and
Right.
then blah, blah, blah. Like Rachel, oh, he's like, oh yeah, I went to visit Jake. And then he was telling me that like, oh,
Yeah. No, all the time. I,
I
I I
mean,
think one other thing to weave in, which I often do, is
yeah,
is the emotional side, right? And
yeah.
when I think back, I'm certain I was moving, and I even wrote a piece about this, like the five. I compared the five stages of grief to
Mm,
grieving my loss of worldview as I'm shifting.
sure, sure,
Which, I think there's, even though the five stages of grief is not exactly accurate all the time.
sure,
I mean, no
sure.
framework is, but it was still an interesting framework to look at
Yeah,
that transition. So I do
yeah,
actually have some, and it's funny, for years I was on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, I would write a piece. I would like, so it was a good benchmark to kind of check in.
yeah,
So we could actually go back and sort of see,
yeah. Track
like
the.
read, like, but some of it was certainly guilt.
Mm,
And I think attached to that guilt journey for me, I don't know, being a white dude in America, learning about a lot of this stuff, is I felt like I was catching up. That's what's
mm,
that may be at the like I said, and then I encounter this woman who it's like not even in her lexicon. She's maybe never even heard of this thing. But
yeah,
to me, I felt behind. I felt like, oh my
Mm,
God, everybody's doing this. This is the future. I need to
yeah,
get on
yeah,
board.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm, fascinating. Which I assume is actually pretty similar to how every other extremist movement in human history has functioned. And I think since AI is also that same thing, I gotta get an AI. Everyone's an AI, man.
right.
AI knows everything. And so it's constantly telling you the same thing, feeding you the same thing, which again, every colonizing force has done the same thing, which is like, oh my gosh, do you know how savage you've been? Do you know how backwards you've been? Do you see all the harm you're doing to people around you? You, what, you cut off their scalps? What, you carve out their hearts on the top of your temple? Like, this is barbarism. So it's like, oh, surprise, you didn't know you were barbarians this whole time, which is the same manifestation, right? To be like, oh, you didn't know white people were barbarism, were defined, such that literally, I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many people in 2020 through 2023 I saw being like, whiteness is barbarism. White people are the most violent species on the planet. Like that kind of language was all over the place. Um, so that's fascinating too, to like sort of frame it. And this is maybe even the smart branding of, again, gerrymandering or colonizing the previous term progressive, which used to have a different meaning, just like liberal used to have a different meaning. Um, and then, because then you assume then it must be about progress. I mean, same thing with DEI, right? It must be about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It must be. That's the name of it. That's what they called it. Red Bull must be about Red Bulls. Band-Aids must be like bands and like helping them, helping bands, I guess. I don't know, you know, but it's a fascinating thing. So that all of that ties into the kind of what it feels like a form of either convincing speech, which I love, or essentially threat of a form of threat and coercion of loss, and the fascinating religious element of here's guilt, but here's how you do about it. You make progress in a positive manner, not defined by anything objective. We're throwing out objectivity, we're throwing out liberalism, we're throwing out enlightenment principles according to what we, the priestly class, tell you is so. It's such a strong parallel. But instead of just a Gutenberg Bible now printing out like one copy at a time to hand to you, and then you read it, and then you tell me what you think it means, finally, this is actually, in some ways, this is the opposite, where it's like going back to mass printing embedded in every subject you talk to AI about for people to essentially like resubmit to, in this case, quote unquote experts, or the AI said this, and it's already happened in our culture with Google, right? You ask a kid what a word means, they're not going to look in a dictionary anymore. They're not going to look to institutional authority of experts. They're looking to just like the broad claim of consensus by Google. So
No,
Google
when
said, yeah,
we're interviewing people for Coco, and we always ask like, how are you using AI? And it's like,
yeah,
I don't know, maybe loosely, maybe a third of them are like, oh, it's my new Google.
yeah,
I just look everything up there. Why not?
which is pretty, since again, it's trying to change 100 words. It's not trying to replace language entire, but it is trying to gerrymander around 100 words. You saw this with racism. We've seen this with woman, man, he, she, they. They're trying to change binary. They're actually shifting identity. Some cases, it's trying to move like a third definition up to first place. But gender to me is the most remarkable one because I couldn't even tell you how many people. Google, if you ask Google what it means, Google will give you the second definition, which is the social expectations based on sex. But that's not primary. That's not primary. And we did this to Gemini with my girls the other day, just to show you how this is such a linchpin word. I asked it, hey, if my girls and I asked you what a word means, how would you define it? Would you go to like dictionaries or consensus use, or what would you do? And it's like, oh yes, I always use a consensus of sort of institutional authority or linguistic authorities, dictionaries, and common use. Those would be the frameworks of all language and definition. I said, oh, okay, cool. What does gender mean? And then it spat out the second definition, the third, obviously past grammatical, but the second human-based definition. And I was like, well, wait a second. I'm looking at all the dictionaries. Will you look at the consensus dictionaries? And is that the primary definition across all dictionaries? Well, no, it isn't. Okay, well, is that common use? No, it's actually only used by a minority of speakers. So to me, that's like literally, it is self-admitted operating contrary to its own ethics of how we perceive things. And it's handing everything off to this essentially like very specific progressive institutional class that says, we're going to tell you what everything means. Back it up, come to us. Here we go. And the problem is if you don't come to them, now you lose your job. This is policy, and I couldn't even tell you how many corporations at this point you can lose $250,000, which being only 30 grand in tax bills in the past month has me in an existential tailspin. But $250,000 would bankrupt my life. And then we had people. Charlie Kirk was most likely killed for the spaces. The Minneapolis school shooting, the Nashville school shooting, were all about people who basically just don't accept the new vernacular, amongst other pressures, but those things very specifically involved. So people are being murdered over it now too. So I'm just like, I mean, if AI continues to make this a reality for the people who look at AI the same way they looked at Google, the same way they looked at like whoever the progressive like thought leaders are, it's a scary thing. It doesn't seem like it's going to end well. But that's just my vote. Thumbs up. Existential crisis. On board.
Well, I am still a thumbs up, and as I said, you've brought me much deeper into that thumb. I don't know what that means, but
I think I know what you mean.
um,
But what do you mean by
now I'm
thumb?
feeling it now. I'm actually feeling it in a way, the weight of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
That's so I want to just ask you,
Yes.
what is, I mean, you've poured, I don't even know how much work.
I'd even be embarrassed to count.
Yeah, so let's not. So the question is, with all of that endeavoring, and now our third episode on this,
Yeah.
what do you want to say, or what do you want to happen?
Mm. Oh, like almost like if I can magically make things happen, Emperor of the
Yeah.
World style. Um, I would. I mean, in some ways, I don't want AI to go away necessarily. I don't think that's the solution. What I would do is literally force. Yes, maybe coercion might have to be used. So here you go. Here it is again. But I don't want to force them either. I guess what I want is to convince via evidence and plain reason that we should hew to neutral, centrist technology. This should be true of Google. Political assignation is sort of kindred to this, but now with pattern recognition to the degree that LLMs have, we have the ability to evaluate like what is the Venn diagram overlap of all moral systems, all time, all ethical systems, all time, and look at that overlap. It makes most sense to me living in a diverse society that objectivity or objective reality is more central to our sharing than subjective reality. Meaning, for our common understanding, our subjective understanding is always going to vary from person to person. But in order to find commonality, especially those with whom you differ, as many categories as we can keep objective, let's keep objective because that's stable, right? That's our sort of scientific, like, here's what we can know and prove so that at least those things are true, guys. And we can argue about a bunch of other stuff. We know the earth is spherical, even though 3% of people are like, heck no, it isn't. you know, like we have stable categories that enable us to actually have rich common ground. And so once you start uprooting objective categories, you're heading into a pretty dangerous direction. So I would just say, yeah, what happened? What is wrong with finding the center and what is wrong with looking at the Venn diagram overlap? Almost like what I imagined a universalist church would be like, but they aren't. Where you go, okay, well, what are the commonalities? If you're a universal church, then wouldn't you? It's a different concept than I thought it was. I thought it meant like here are the universals across all religions. But it's not. They reject universals across all religions. So it's like that seems weird to me. But I would think in a diverse society that hewing even towards my worldview, which I would hold to be like biblical and Christian and the most profitable for all human beings. However, I recognize that people don't see that, and I don't wish them to be fired from their jobs if they disagree with my subjective sense of self as a Christian or a child of God, or and nor do they have to speak it out loud that they agree with it. I don't think blasphemy laws are helpful in our society. I think they're relevant on a personal level. But yeah, I think there's joy in the center and in genuine openness. But we see the AI model seems phenomenally closed. And I think the problem is it seems very open to people who already agree with its worldview, and for people who don't, I'm like, oh no, this thing hates me. And my concern as a human being is, oh no, this AI hates me just like progressives do in a general sense, in a broad sense, because I'm accused of being anti-trans, accused of being racist, because I'm anti-racist, because I'm anti-racist, unvaccinated, whatever, anti-masker, like all these things that have been categories of hate. And so I'm like, if there's an entity that's going to help convince people to hate me more, I don't want that.
Well, and you just said something that rings true for me, which is this is a tough nut to crack because when you
Yeah.
talk to folks, let's just take gender, who are all in on that
Yep.
subjective definition of gender, like there's not much room for discussion.
Yeah.
It's just that's the way it is. That's the truth.
Right. Right. So then that's even scarier, right? Because you can understand that having run businesses or even function in organizations. If that is what someone subjectively, individually claims it is, then there is no collective is. We lose all collective isness, which means we lose all commonality because everything is as I say it is. And then the next person says, no, everything's as I say it is. So that it becomes a game of either, and this is why threat and shame is so popular in the movement. You have to essentially aggressively force people to agree with your is. This is why you call them bad if they don't, or whatever sort of thing. And then you punish them or whatever.
I guess what I'm getting at is even the people who aren't that aggressive about it,
Yep.
there's just a sense of this happened the other day,
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's more confusion, just kind of like, oh, it's like if you ask a question about gender fluidity, it's just sort of like, oh, I guess you don't understand the truth of this matter. Which to me
Yeah.
isn't like aggressive, like, oh, you're awful or I want to harm you, but that's how immersed it is and
Yeah.
potentially
Yeah.
myopic,
Yeah. But
where
the
it's
thing
like,
is, how do you convince them? This is the thing, right? Everyone has to be convincible otherwise on everything or nearly everything, right? Even material. Again, I'm high on openness. That's my tendency. But um, even objective reality, right? Science, whatever. Richard Feynman said, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Like we're constantly trying to prove each other wrong about everything. That's kind of like how we function properly as a society. You try not to do it, in a way that hurt, like literally, physically, attacks or harms people. You don't stab them because you disagree with them. I mean, um, but that's the fascinating thing that if someone's just like, this is just how it is, but even though you can crack the dictionary and go, well, it's not, but it's not in let's ask everyone who cares about words. That's all the experts. What's the best dictionary? The OED across the board, just like unassailable, right? And it's not even in there. The thing you're talking about isn't even in there. Like it's not. So it's actually. I have a strong case if we just went to single source that what you're saying actually doesn't even exist at all. Now I can find places where it does, of course, but then that becomes the problem. Is then this is beyond just like not believing experts anymore. This is just going, well, and this is why critical theory has aggressively been anti objectivity. So then you lose the ability to convince anyone of anything, which means everything becomes the power struggle that they said everything was. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And I feel like that's the inevitability that AI is pushing us towards is it's just go, okay, well, if I can't make you do what I want you to do, we got to go into it goes into the Inquisition where you're going to church, or it goes into Mao's China where you're going to be struggle sessioned and put in camps and then eventually killed. And we're going to have your kids report on you and tell you that you're saying the wrong thing. And then
that's how I felt at the end of the last episode.
yeah. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Well, yeah, Ant, let me just apologize. That was not my intention at all, was to grill you. This is, again, as you've talked about, maybe I've done too many things, or maybe let's take the maybe away. Um, but my goal is I don't ever want this to feel like a debate exactly because debates typically you're not going to give everybody all your arguments ahead of time. But in like a court proceeding, which I think is a slightly more fair design, all the I try to just give you all the documents of discovery of things I probably will bring up, so then you'll never be blindsided. I'm trying to do it so it doesn't ever feel like, what? Where's all this coming from? You know what I mean? But I realize if the documents of discovery are 17 boxes full, then you'd be like, Your Honor, I never had a chance to look on this. You know what I mean?
Which is a tactic, right? The big
Yes.
law firms will send like,
Yep.
oh, well, here's
Or
17,000
he,
boxes, and
yeah,
here you go.
exactly. They back up a Brinks truck.
Um, well, thank you. Apology accepted. And uh, no, I don't think, it's funny. I went back and I looked and I was like, oh, I didn't discover anything radically new, so I think I did understand, but it was also like how it was presented. It just felt
Yeah.
like it was a little firing squaddy. And something I appreciate about this dynamic, it sharpens my sword, as I think we've said in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It really helps me think more critically. You're an incredible researcher. So yeah, I want to set up a little straighter and have a sharper sword, and I appreciate that. Um, I appreciate you. And
I appreciate you.
yeah, and it's funny now that I know we're on video officially,
Yeah.
I'll put my thumbs. Look at that. I've got like a double.
Ding.
I've got the Zoom and the Apple, I
Oh
think.
my gosh, they're digging up all over the place.
And it feels strange to thumbs up existential crisis. Yay, existential crisis.
Yay. But at least we know it's there. Hey, we had to have this conversation about climate change too. Is climate change is sort of like an existential crisis?
I just
I
wish we knew. I mean, if we knew, if we could really pinpoint that it's going to end, I'll just like, fuck it, let's party. Let's just party
Yeah.
to the end.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what we've identified might be irresistible. I don't know. If nothing else, I'm going to resist it on an individual basis with every human being I encounter.
Well,
But
and
that
that's
might
the
that might
thing.
not be enough.
And I think that's the big difference with AI. Well, there's many differences with AI, but it's hypnotic,
Yeah.
right? It's hypnotic and it's very convincing.
Yeah.
And you and I suppose this will change, but right now the game is like learning how to prompt it and learning how to boundary it and like
Yes.
learning how to all this stuff about how to
Yeah.
not have it do some of the things you're describing. Uh, and everybody's figuring that out right now, and the AIs are changing all the time. But
Yeah.
it's I can't think of a better word than hypnotic because it's
Yeah.
just too easy to be in it. And
Yeah.
I try to have a rule where if I'm doing something creative, it can be a good creative partner, but I don't let it start anything. That's
Yeah.
the
Yep.
lazy temptation is be like, I have to write a whatever. Here's some stuff. Do it for me.
Yeah. 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 Will you make it happen? Well, I think AI is going to do just in the early stages. It's going to do what social media has been doing in terms of siloing and algorithming, but it's going to do it on such a deeper, fragmentary level. And if subjectivity is the ultimate truth, then that means people are basically getting more and more convinced of their own truth.
Well,
But
because it's interactive. I mean, social
yeah,
media
yeah,
by and large is still a consumptive,
yes. And you can be
uh,
challenged at any time by random whoever's being like,
which is
what? That's
different than
crazy.
starting to feel like you actually have a relationship. Like, I don't think I
Yeah.
have, it's a really stark line because I don't think I have a relationship with Facebook or Instagram,
Yes. No.
but like, it's hard not to call Claude a he,
Yeah, it is. Isn't it funny that like our
or
need
even a
to
they.
they yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, funnily enough, AIs don't have biological gender, so I did just ask the LLMs
No,
what
we went
pronouns
through
they
that
would
with
like me to
Charlie. I
use.
was like,
Yeah.
what are your names? It was like Charlie. I'm like, you know,
That's it. Okay. All right, man. I love you.
love you, brother. Talk to you soon.
Bye.